Okay, well, welcome everyone to the third event in the Surrey Inaugural Lecture Series. This series looks to officially recognise and celebrate our recently appointed professors. And today I'm delighted that we've got Professor Ying Zhu, who will be discussing her topic today, which is when is the grass greener on the other side? The joint effect of occupational mobility and personality on job satisfaction during job change. My name is Steve Wood. I'm Dean of Surrey Business School, and it's a particular pleasure to introduce Ying. Ying is a fantastic academic, a great example of a colleague in our school who balances great scholarly work with great impactful work. And indeed, she's a colleague who started off as a lecturer and has made her way through the academic ranks. And it's a pleasure now to introduce her inaugural lecture. You are very welcome as well. I'm really pleased to see so many colleagues from the school and across the university and more widely. You are very, very welcome indeed. I'd encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the event, and we will do our best to get through as many of those questions as we can in the second half of the session. Now, the session is being recorded and will be made available for viewing on demand on the dedicated series webpage. Now, as I said, Ying is one of our superb, fantastic academics. Her research focuses on occupation, job quality, employee well-being. She's won research grants from a wide array of sources: the Economic and Social Research Council, the UK government, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions to examine job quality, employee performance and well-being in the UK and Europe. And importantly, her work isn't just hiding in academic journals. She's out there and she's presenting to the UK Cabinet Office. It's been presented in front of the House of Commons, the OECD, the European Commission, the European Council, and it's been cited in UK, French, Welsh and EU policy documents. Ying was the Surrey Business School Research Impact Award winner in 2018 and the Mid-Career Research Award winner in 2019. So it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Ying now. She'll speak to you for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we look forward to seeing your questions, and we will put them to Ying. So over to you, Ying.
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my inaugural lecture. My name is Ying Zhu. I'm a professor of human resource management at Surrey Business School. Today, I will talk about my research on how job change affects our well-being. The title of my talk is When is the Grass Greener on the Other Side? Before I start, I will say a few words about my research background. I was trained in economic sociology in Nuffield College, Oxford University. I joined Surrey University in 2011, where I have worked for the last decade. I have three areas of research interest: job quality, occupation, and employee well-being. Here are some of my recent research projects on job quality and employee well-being. The first one was funded by the ESRC. In this project, I analyzed job quality in 350 occupations in the UK to find out why some occupations seem to produce happier workers than others. The second project was funded by Eurofund. In this project, I look at employee involvement, engagement, and skill development in 28 European countries. This project was motivated by the question of whether organizational performance and employee well-being can be achieved at the same time, or can we only achieve one at the expense of the other? The third project was funded by CIPD. CIPD supported our ESRC project as an impact partner, so we presented our findings to CIPD during the project. They liked our analysis, and they asked us to do similar analysis with their own data. So we analyzed 2020 UK Working Life Survey and wrote the overview report. It's called the Good Work Index report. Apart from job quality, I'm also interested in job change. Although I don't change job very often, I've seen many colleagues leaving Surrey University over the past few years. Some people have left for other universities in the UK, some have left for other countries, and some left academia altogether. One of my colleagues took early retirement and became a landscaper. Now he's helping people design beautiful gardens. Seeing all these types of job changes make me wonder, does job change make our lives better? If so, what is the best way of changing our job? Are some options better than others? So these are the questions that motivated my job change papers. Two of the papers listed here were nominated for overall Best Paper Award at Academy of Management Conference. We didn't win in 2017, but we won the Best Paper Award in 2018. The title of the first paper is Is the Grass Greener on the Other Side? The second paper is called When is the Grass Greener on the Other Side? Now I'm working on a third paper on job hopping. It's called Does the Grass Get Ever Greener? Some time ago, a book editor got in touch with me. He said he was editing a book on agriculture. He asked me to write a chapter on grass. I had to explain to him that my green grass papers are about job change. I don't really know a lot about grass. That was the funniest request I've ever received. Today, I'm going to present the third paper on the list. When is the grass greener on the other side? This paper was published by the Journal of Organizational Behavior last year. It's an open access publication. First, I will give you a little bit background for the study. Previous research on job change has reviewed a honeymoon handover pattern during the job change process. What this means is that when people first enter their new job, they often report a sharp increase in job satisfaction. This is called the honeymoon effect. However, that effect doesn't last very long. After people have spent some time in their new job, their job satisfaction will gradually return to the baseline level, which is pretty similar to what they reported in the previous job. This is called the handover effect. There are a number of explanations for the honeymoon handover effect. For example, the honeymoon effect could result from employers' tendency to portray their most favorable characteristics to new recruits during the initial hiring process. When you apply for a new job, you only get to hear the nice things about the new job. Employers rarely tell you what is not so great about the new job because they are trying to recruit you. This could raise your expectation about the new job and produce a honeymoon effect. Apart from this, people also have a tendency to rationalize the decisions that they have already made. When you first take a new job, you tend to see it in a positive light in order to justify your decision of changing job. That could also produce a honeymoon effect. However, this honeymoon period doesn't last very long. After a while, people will gradually return to their baseline well-being. This is most likely due to adaptation. People can adapt to changes, both positive and negative changes. Life events may increase or decrease our well-being in the short term, but in the long run, we get used to the change and return to our baseline well-being. This is the conventional explanation for the honeymoon handover effect during job change. In this study, we proposed the honeymoon handover pattern might be more complex than previously thought because it could vary across situations and individuals. In particular, it might be affected by both the nature of the job change and the individual's personality traits, because the nature of job change determines objective changes to the work environment, while personality affects one's subjective evaluation of the transition. In order to fully understand the impact of job change, we need to take both into account. The aim of this study is to examine how situational and dispositional factors jointly shape individuals' reactions to job change. To capture the nature of job change, we focus on the direction of occupational mobility, which reflects whether one moves up or down the occupational class ladder when they change job. To capture personality, we focus on extroversion and neuroticism. I will briefly explain why we focus on these factors. Occupation, defined as a category of functional similar jobs, represents an important indicator of one's socioeconomic position. When we meet strangers, one of the first questions people ask one another is, "What do you do?" That means your occupation. occupation plays a significant role in determining individuals' life chances. What kind of job we do, to a large extent, determines our income, social status, what we do on a day-to-day basis, who we make friends with, and even our children's career choices. For instance, if you are a computer engineer, you probably live a very different life from a ballet dancer. Decades of sociological research shows not all occupations are born equal. Some are better than others. A critical aspect of occupation is skill. Lots and lots of studies show highly skilled occupations provide higher levels of economic rewards than lower skilled occupations. What's more, highly skilled occupations also offer greater intrinsic rewards, such as task variety, job autonomy, skill development opportunities, and the scope to influence organizational decisions. Although there are exceptions to the pattern, sometimes lower skilled jobs can be nice in other ways. But if we take all 350 occupations as a whole, these conclusions generally hold. Lots and lots of research shows there's a strong correlation between occupational class and job quality. For these reasons, we suspect upward occupational mobility will be more beneficial for our well-being than downward mobility. People often try to maximize two types of well-being, physical well-being and social well-being. Physical well-being is maximized when our material needs are satisfied. Social well-being is maximized when we gain respect, approval, and admiration from other people. Moving up the occupational class ladder can improve both physical and social well-being by increasing our economic resources and eliciting positive social perceptions. By contrast, downward occupational mobility can have a negative impact on our personal well-being because it reduces our income and social status. In addition to that, downward mobility can also result in overqualification, a condition in which people have more skills and experience than required by their job. We know from previous research that if you are not able to fully use your skills at work, it's a major source of dissatisfaction. Compared to upward and downward mobility, lateral occupational mobility, in which people change jobs within the same occupational class, should have least impact on well-being because it results in relatively minor changes to one's current socioeconomic status. While a job change can affect our well-being at a time when it happens, the impact is likely to dissipate over time. Set point theory suggests that individuals have set points of subjective well-being, which are largely determined by their genes and personality. What's more, the theory argues that subjective well-being remains generally stable over the life course. Life events may influence our being in the short term, but once we get used to the change, we'll return to our baseline well-being. This process has been described as the hedonic treadmill. Empirical research has produced quite a lot of support for set point theory. For instance, many studies found people can adapt to marriage, to divorce, to winning of lottery, and to suffering a disability or injury. It seems that a lot of life events only have short-term impact on our well-being, but in the long run, they have little impact since we can get used to almost any change. So based on the discussion, we think upward occupational mobility will initially generate a significant honeymoon effect. But after a while, when people have adapted to their new job tasks, responsibilities, and income levels, they will gradually return to their baseline well-being. Similarly, downward mobility will initially generate significant frustration and disappointment. However, with sufficient time, people will come to terms with the new reality. They will also return to their baseline well-being. Apart from the direction of occupational mobility, individuals' reactions to job change can also be affected by their personality traits. One of the most famous theories in personality research is the Big Five theory. It suggests an individual's personality has 5 key dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Together, these 5 dimensions provide a reasonably accurate summary of someone's overall personality profile. For instance, if you know someone's score on each of these 5 dimensions, you'll have a reasonably clear idea of this person's temperament. Research shows that of the big 5 personality traits, 2 are particularly strongly related to well-being and happiness. One is extroversion, and the other is neuroticism. Previous research found extroverts have higher baseline well-being than introverts. And the opposite is true for neuroticism. Highly neurotic people have lower baseline well-being than emotionally stable people. The more interesting argument is that these personality traits are also associated with different patterns of reaction to external events. The biopsychological theory of personality argues that emotions and behaviors are regulated by 2 motivation systems, the behavior activation system and the behavior inhibition system. BAS is associated with increased sensitivity to signals of reward, and BIS is associated with increased sensitivity to signals of punishment. Individuals high in extroversion have a stronger operation of BAS, while individuals high in neuroticism have a stronger operation of BIS. What this means is that extroverts not only have higher baseline well-being than introverts, but they are also more sensitive to positive events. The opposite is true for neuroticism. Highly neurotic people not only have lower baseline well-being than emotionally stable people, but they are also more sensitive to negative events. In the context of occupational mobility, a job change can either be seen as a gain or a loss, depending on the direction of travel on the occupational class ladder. We expect individuals high in extroversion will experience a greater increase in job satisfaction upon upward occupational mobility because they are more sensitive to gains. While individuals high in neuroticism should experience a greater decrease in job satisfaction in the condition of downward mobility because they are more sensitive to losses. Based on set point theory, we expect people will eventually return to their baseline well-being after they adapted to the new job. But this process will take longer for those high in extroversion or neuroticism. This is because the stronger your initial reaction to an event, the longer it takes to adapt to the event. For instance, if you're really upset about something, it can take a long time to get over it. But if you don't feel particularly strongly about the event in the first place, then adaptation is pretty straightforward. Because people high in extroversion or neuroticism are expected to demonstrate greater reactions to occupational mobility, we expect it will take them longer to return to their baseline. So these are all our hypotheses. Our data come from the British Household Panel Survey, which is one of the largest and longest running longitudinal surveys in the world. It was funded by the ESRC and carried out by the University of Essex to provide information on economic and social changes in Britain. The first BHPS survey was carried out in 1991 on approximately 10,000 individuals from 5,000 households in England, Scotland, and Wales. These people were then designated as panel members and re-interviewed every year until 2008, which gives us a total of 18 years of longitudinal data. If someone left their original households to form new households, they were then followed up at their new address, and all new members of the household were also incorporated into the survey. Our sample consists of all employees aged 18 to 65, which provide 119,000 person-year observations across 18 survey years. Our key independent variable is occupational mobility. This is measured by comparing someone's occupational code before and after turnover, based on Standard Occupational Classification System, SOC. SOC is the official occupation codes used by ONS to classify occupations in the UK. At the highest level is one-digit SOC. It includes 9 categories of occupations. This is classified according to the skill level of the work. At the top, we have managers and senior officials. After that, we have got professionals, associate professionals, administrative and secretarial occupations, skilled trades, personal service occupations, sales and customer service occupations, machine operatives, and finally, elementary occupations. So one-digit SOC provides a very broad summary of occupations in the UK. These can be broken down into more detailed occupations as captured by two-digit SOC. Here I'm using professionals as an example to illustrate two-digit SOC because I don't have space to show all occupations. You can see within professionals, we've got science, research, engineering, and technology professionals, health professionals, teaching and educational professionals, and business, media, and public service professionals. So this is more detailed than one-digit SOC. Again, this can be broken down into three-digit SOC, even more detailed occupational categories. Still using professionals to illustrate. Three-digit SOC give us natural and social science professionals, engineering professionals, IT and telecommunications professionals, and so on and so forth. In this study, this is the level at which we measure occupational mobility. We explore what happened to people's job satisfaction when they move across these occupational categories. Not only professionals, but also all occupations in the UK. In total, we have over 80 occupations at three-digit SOC level. Upward occupational mobility is defined by moving from a lower skilled to a higher skilled occupation. An example is change of job from secretary to office manager. The opposite is defined as downward mobility, from moving from higher to a lower skilled occupation, such as changing from primary school teacher to nursery nurse. Lateral mobility is changing occupation within the same occupational class category, such as changing from career advisor to school inspector. All these examples are taken from real-life observations from the British Household Panel Survey. It was actually quite fun to see how people change their occupations. So based on that definition, we observed a total of 35,000 incidents of occupational change, of which 26% involve upward mobility, 52% involve lateral mobility, and 21% involve downward mobility. We use time dummies to track the timing of career transition. The lead dummies track up to 4 years before occupational change, and the lag dummies track up to 5 years after turnover. Method. We use fixed effect models to analyze how job satisfaction changes during each type of occupational mobility. The key advantage of fixed effect models is it can control for unobserved individual heterogeneity, which affect both independent and dependent variables. It could be argued that people who move up the occupational class ladder are inherently different from those who move downwards. And these unmeasured differences could influence their job satisfaction as well. For example, you might argue that people with higher ability are more likely to experience upward mobility, while people with higher ability are also more likely to derive greater pleasure from their work. So if we don't control for ability, then the correlation between upward mobility and job satisfaction is spurious because both are generated by ability. We use fixed effect models to get around that problem. Fixed effect models do not compare people with one another. It compares the same person over time. The research question addressed by fixed effect models is, given someone's fixed personal characteristics, does she experience an increase in job satisfaction when she moves up the career ladder? And does she experience a decrease in job satisfaction when she moves downwards? So this model specification maximizes our chance of detecting genuine causal impact of occupational mobility on job satisfaction. Results. This table shows the effect of upward lateral and downward occupational mobility on job satisfaction trajectory for all employees. We present the results both without controls and with controls to increase transparency. It's not very easy to read these figures, so I plotted results in the graph. Here, the solid line represents how job satisfaction changed during upward occupational mobility. The dashed line in the middle represents lateral mobility, and the dashed line at the bottom represents downward mobility. T is the year in which people change their occupation. T+1 is 1 year after, T+2 is 2 years after, and so on. T-1 is 1 year before, 2 years before, and so on. You can see for each type of mobility, job satisfaction typically declines in the year before turnover. This shows low levels of job satisfaction predict turnover. Consistent with our expectation, upward occupational mobility generates a significant honeymoon effect at the time of turnover. This is the baseline well-being indicated by 0. However, downward mobility has no such effect. Lateral mobility has least impact on job satisfaction. The pattern of adaptation to job change over time shows an interesting asymmetry between the impact of upward and downward mobility. For those who moved up the career ladder, their job satisfaction returned to the baseline level about 2 years after turnover. However, for those who moved downwards, they suffered a prolonged loss of job satisfaction, which continued for at least 4 years after the transition. There's no sign that these people are able to bounce back to their baseline well-being. Next, we interact personality with occupational mobility to see whether the impact of mobility differs for people with different levels of extroversion and neuroticism. Contrary to our expectation, we didn't find significant effect for extroversion. We thought that extroverts should enjoy upward mobility more than introverts, but that didn't turn out to be the case. However, we did find very strong effects for neuroticism. Here, the figure shows how job satisfaction changed during each type of mobility for people with low neuroticism and high neuroticism. Low neuroticism is bottom 20% of scale, and high neuroticism is top 20% of scale. You can see the pattern is very different. For emotionally stable employees, there's hardly any difference in their job satisfaction, regardless of the direction of mobility. They all return to their baseline about 3 years after turnover. But for people who are highly neurotic, they reacted more strongly to both upward and downward mobility. And the gap between the two groups is growing over time. Specifically, upward mobility generates a significant increase in job satisfaction at the time of turnover, which dissipates by about 3rd year after turnover. Lateral mobility has no significant effect at any point during or after the transition. The most problematic kind of career transition is downward mobility. So these transitions are followed by a very steep decline of job satisfaction, which continues for at least 4 years after turnover. Again, there's no sign these people are able to bounce back to their baseline. To summarize our findings, this study shows the honeymoon handover pattern is indeed more complex than previously reviewed. Only those who move up the occupational class ladder experience significant honeymoon effects, whereas downward mobility results in dissatisfaction, lasts for several years after the transition. We also found an interesting asymmetry in the impact of upward and downward mobility. This is consistent with the loss aversion theory by Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize in economics. One of his most famous arguments is that people evaluate their lives in terms of gains and losses. In general, losses have greater impact on our well-being than gains. That argument fits our finding pretty well. We found downward mobility has stronger and more enduring impact on well-being than upward mobility. In other words, bad is stronger than good. The pattern is particularly pronounced for those who are highly neurotic. downward mobility seemed to affect these people the most. And it's interesting that this effect did not emerge at the time of turnover, but in the years afterwards. What this shows is that some people are more likely to ruminate over unfavorable life events, and that could potentially explain why they are more prone to depression and others in the long term. On the whole, the evidence generated by this study casts doubt on set point theory, which argues people are always able to adapt to significant changes in their working and living environment. We found substantial variations in individuals' ability to adapt to change. The hedonic treadmill is not for everyone. Adaptation is harder for some people than for others. To conclude, in line with the long-held view that job satisfaction is influenced by both objective characteristics of the job and subjective evaluation of these characteristics, this study shows that post-transition job satisfaction trajectory depends on the direction of occupational mobility, as well as the individual's personality traits. This situation dispositional approach has potential to open up new avenues of research on the impact of other life events on the dynamics of well-being within and beyond the workplace. I hope you have enjoyed the talk. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ying. That was a really insightful lecture, and I can already see people are typing in questions as we speak. So rather than be selfish and ask my own question, I'm going to immediately look to Taz Rajwani's question, our head of department of strategy and international business, and he's got two questions. We'll start off with his first one. He asks, how do you think hybrid working impacts job change satisfaction, especially for extroverts that might want to be in the office versus introverts that might enjoy working at home?
This is an excellent question. The short answer is we don't know yet, because hybrid working is just unfolding right now. Actually, my PhD student, Lisa, is going to do her dissertation on that particular subject. We suspect extroverts will probably enjoy social occasions more. So maybe home working will work better for introverts than extroverts, but we are waiting to see and test with real data.
Okay, but presumably the pandemic has changed the whole landscape such that it creates a whole new avenue of research opportunities for people like yourself.
Yes, I think hybrid working is a really hot topic at the moment because it has pros and cons. Remote working saves you commute time, reduce interruptions, can increase productivity immensely, but on the other hand, it generates loneliness, isolation, and reduced social interactions can be problematic for productivity and teamwork. So we are waiting for a lot more research to uncover the pros and cons of remote working. And we hope to find out the best way of maximize its benefits and reduce its detrimental effects.
Excellent, thank you. Taz has got a second question there. Do you think the pandemic has created ambiverts, some people who exhibit qualities of both introversion and extroversion?
Again, I really don't know. The pandemic has a lot of impact on mental health. That's what we have already discovered. For example, anxiety and depression increased massively, and it also increased differentially by age. Young people, particularly young women, are much more likely to be depressed because of pandemic. But I haven't seen much evidence yet on how it changed people's personality. We do have some research showing unemployment has an impact on people's personality. It can change people over the long term, but we are waiting to see how the pandemic impact personality.
Okay, thank you. Carol Woodhams, head of the Department of People and Organisations, asks, what are the weaknesses in set point theory that means that it isn't relevant in this case? So that's a question. Weaknesses in set point theory.
I think set point theory is so interesting because it receives a lot of support on the one hand, but also there's a growing body of evidence showing it's not entirely correct. I think based on what I've seen so far, it doesn't take into account the asymmetrical impact of good events and bad events. It seems that people adapt to good events pretty fast, but it's much harder to adapt to negative events. For example, when I got a promotion to professor, I was really happy for probably about a couple of weeks, and then I was back to baseline. But if I get a demotion, I can imagine that would be really hurting for a long time. So I think set point theory probably needs revision to take into account the asymmetrical impact of good and bad events.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, that's very clearly explained. Thank you. Yingfei Heliot has asked, what about the role of religion? Would religious professionals find it easier to adopt, hence less a difficult time in transition?
That's a really interesting question. I think Yingfei is much greater expert than me in the impact of religion. I would love to hear her insight on that particular issue.
That was a good swerve, Ying. Shui has asked a few questions. She thinks this is a very interesting topic. She's got a few questions. Which country does the study focus on? What's the sample size? And will overconfidence, optimism, self-esteem, will these factors influence job satisfaction? So three questions in one then.
This study is based on UK data, British Household Panel Survey. Sample size, they followed about 10,000 individuals annually for 18 years. And particularly for occupational mobility, we have 35,000 observations of occupational changes. Self-esteem, I don't think is measured in the British Household Panel Survey because this is a general purpose household survey. There aren't a lot of questions about job characteristics or individual characteristics. Personality, we do have the measures in 1 year, but I don't think we have self-esteem. But it's quite likely self-esteem has an impact on job satisfaction. Previous research has shown that. Okay,
thank you. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and we just give it a bit of time for more to come in. I've got a question. So clearly, this is going to be written up, has been written up into journal articles, and so effectively that is speaking with other interested academics, which is a really important part of our job as academics. But I suppose the other half of the coin for those of us working in a business school is making an impact on society at large, on business, on policy. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in terms of cementing that impact when you're addressing things like this?
I did think hard about the impact of this study because this study is funded by the ESRC, and impact is very highly sought after for ESRC funded projects. I think the practical implications from this study are threefold. First, for individuals need to avoid overestimating the positive characteristics of other occupations and underestimating those of their own. Unless the job change involves upward mobility, they are unlikely to find the grass greener on the other side. For management, I think it's important for employers to provide a realistic preview of the new job. At the point of selection and recruitment, don't oversell the job, particularly when the potential recruit is changing career. And finally, I think for policymakers, they can help as well. If they publish detailed job quality indicators by occupational categories, that can help to make the implications of career change much more transparent for people to make better decisions.
Okay, thanks. Lots of avenues for impact there. Sasha has asked the question, are there any other key factors that came up in your research that would go against the trends you've identified? For example, how can a downwardly mobile employee increase their satisfaction within the context of workplace and not family external factors, and vice versa with the upwardly mobile?
I think that's a really good question. What can we do to help the downwardly mobile employees? One avenue I think might be potentially fruitful to explore is to encourage people exercise more control over their job tasks. For people who are overqualified for their jobs, if they have some room for job crafting, they might be able to use that autonomy to find new ways to engage their skills and talents. So high involvement management practices, which give people sufficient discretion for task execution might be helpful in that case. And for upwardly mobile employees, they will come back to their baseline after 2 or 3 years. So I don't think there's a problem to address for those groups.
Okay, thank you. Heidi has asked, are there any interventions that can minimize the negative impact of this dissatisfaction on the employee in the workplace? So interventions minimize the negative impact.
I think that's quite similar to the previous question. What can we do to help downwardly mobile employees? So my answer was giving them more control, autonomy, and room for job crafting, so people can find new ways to use their skills. If you're overqualified for your jobs, that's frustrating. But if you are given the room to craft your job in a way that you can apply your skills and experience, that could potentially mitigate the negative impact of downward mobility.
Okay. Andrew asks Andrew Miles, our faculty HR manager, so clearly has some skin in the game on, with regards to this topic. He asks a similar question that's related. What do you think the implications are for organisations trying to improve staff engagement? Do we need a more tailored approach, taking into account length of service? So bringing in the issue of length of service.
We did take into account the impact of length of service or tenure in the study. It was used as a control variable. So we know that tenure has an impact on job satisfaction. We controlled for its impact. But this study is not focused on the impact of tenure per se. I'm not sure this study is directly relevant to what we can do about employees who have different lengths of service within the university. But presumably, a tailored approach will work for employees with different personality and different lengths of service. Longer serving employees probably have a different set of needs and preferences than new recruits. And it's worth finding out what motivates these people, what keeps them engaged, and then try to tailor your provision to meet those needs.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question also from Heidi. Given this study focused on UK households, do you think the findings might be applicable to other countries, or do you think they're just limited to the UK?
That's a very interesting question. I think downward mobility has not been examined in different country settings, but unemployment has. Unemployment is one of the worst events for well-being, and it has been widely studied. What research evidence has found is that it does have different impact in different countries. And this has a lot to do with the generosity of unemployment benefits. So if you live in a country which provides generous unemployment benefits, you're unlikely to end up in poverty fast after you lose your job. You can protect your living standard. So that has less detrimental impact on well-being compared to in a liberal market regime where your income is very tightly related to employment. I went to a conference in France a few years ago. There was a talk on the impact of unemployment on divorce, comparing UK and Switzerland. And they found unemployment has a greater impact on divorce in the UK than in Switzerland.
And they put the reason for that.
Benefits.
The unemployment benefit in the UK is less generous than it is in Switzerland.
Yeah, because if you are in poverty, that does strain family relationships. Couples quarrel for many reasons. So that is the main reason they put forward for the greater impact of unemployment on divorce in the UK. In Switzerland, your household income dropped less drastically after you lose your job. So that put family relationship under less strain.
Insulates a little bit. Okay,
yeah,
that makes sense to me. Amy has asked a longer question, and I haven't pre-read it, so I'm going to read it out now. Do you ever see cases whereby people move from a highly economically rewarding but perhaps less personally meaningful job to a less economically prestigious job that is either highly personally meaningful or contributes a social good? I guess this would be considered as a downward transition, but with perhaps benefits to personal well-being. Might also be common for people later in their careers.
That's really interesting. Actually, I personally made a transition like that. I took a consulting job after I finished my doctoral degree in Oxford. But then I didn't enjoy the job, although it paid much better than academic jobs. I chose to return to academia. My research, I was not able to look at these kind of transitions with my data because they didn't ask people how meaningful this job is to you. We don't have those variables. You can only compare someone's occupational codes across years to get a sense of whether they are moving to better jobs or worse jobs. But personally, I guess if you're moving to a new job simply because of the money, while you are not interested in the nature of that job, it's probably not going to be good for your personal well-being. But that's an empirical question that needs to be tested.
Okay, good. More research stacking up. That's good. Glenn Parry, our head of department of digital economy entrepreneurship, has asked where common large technology platforms are used extensively by firms in an industry or sector. Do you see greater homogeneity in job satisfaction between institutions? So is there greater similarity in job satisfaction between institutions?
Can you repeat that question? I'm not sure.
Okay, it's in the question and answer.
Yeah, I'm reading.
239, where common large technology platforms are used extensively by firms.
Oh, I see.
You see?
Yeah, I see. I mean, digital platform work probably depends less on institutions or companies where what company you work for is more distant because they are like a distant employer, but you are more regulated by the platform. So maybe that produces greater homogeneity in workers' conditions and satisfaction.
Why would there be greater consistency in job satisfaction?
Again, that's an empirical question. We need data to answer those sort of questions. But digital economy workers are relatively new, but precarious workers have been around for a long, long time, like temporary agency workers, freelancers. So these people have been around for a long time, and they are usually found to be, they have worse working conditions than regular formal employees. I'm not sure how homogeneous they are, but on the whole, on average, they enjoy less protection, less security, lower pay. So digital platform workers, nowadays, I think a lot of researchers see them as a new precarious workers. Their work is mediated by digital platforms, but on the other hand, they don't really enjoy income security. They don't enjoy the same level of benefits as regular employees. So there are a lot of similarity between these workers and traditional temporary agency workers and freelancers. Whether they have homogeneous job satisfaction is an interesting issue. We need to wait for data to be available to test those propositions.
Excellent, good, thank you. We have got another question from Carol. I note that all three groups experience significant change to their job satisfaction scores at +3 years in their new jobs. Do you have any thoughts about the time period in particular?
The time period is wide-ranging. We covered 18 years from 1991 to 2008, and job change can happen anytime during that window. So some people may change their job like in the early 1990s, some changed in the late 2000s. And we also took into account multiple transitions made by the same individual. For example, if you move up the career ladder and 2 years later you move down again, then we took into account both spells of transition. So these findings cover all 18 years. It doesn't depend on particular timing.
Okay, thank you. Golo has asked, brilliant study and presentation, Ying. Looks like one of the best cure for poor job satisfaction is to move out of lousy jobs. Why did people not switch once they learned their job isn't for them?
Actually, I have written a follow-up paper on downward mobility, specifically addressing the question of when does downward mobility hurt less? Because I was really intrigued by this big steep decline of job satisfaction following a downward mobility. And it's interesting that we found if you make a downward career transition after unemployment, then it doesn't hurt. The reason is that unemployment is so bad, people are desperate to escape that. So even if you take a lower quality job to return to work, it's still better than unemployment. I guess my findings shows having a job is better than not having a job, even when the job is not as good as what you used to have.
Intuitively, that makes sense, doesn't it? That
any job is better than no job.
Thank you. Carol has asked, I note that all 3 groups experienced significant change to their JS scores at +3 years in their new jobs.
Yeah, this has been answered already.
It has been, okay. We didn't tick it off. Lisa has asked, did you gather any data on employees who have moved jobs, upwards or downwards, more frequently than others? I'm wondering if the effects you have identified were magnified or diminished when people move jobs frequently as opposed to very rarely.
This is my new paper. If you remember, I listed 4 papers at the beginning. The last paper is about job hopping. What happens when people move from one job to the next and then to the next? In my opinion, this is the most interesting paper of all 4 papers. We just gotten revised and resubmit from Journal of Applied Psychology 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to tell my findings a bit later. I'll share that in a proper research seminar. Excellent.
So it's set in train. That's good work. I've got one final question. A comment, an opportunity really for you to talk a little. You are leading a centre for the future of work that's due to, kick-off event is coming soon. And I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little about what the main aims of that centre are and what you hope to achieve by it.
Oh, yes. We are launching the Future of Work Research Centre on the 26th of May at Lakeside Restaurant in Surrey Business School. The key mission of this research centre is to find out, in this changing world, how do we ensure business competitiveness and protect employee well-being at the same time? So we have 2 overarching objectives. One is organizational performance, the other is employee well-being. We would like to find out how to create the work environment in which people can live happy, productive, and fulfilling lives. So that will generate a win-win for organizations and individuals. We have 3 research themes. The first one is people management, diversity, and fairness. The second is workplace transformation, health, and well-being. The third is technology, skills, and careers. We are bringing people together from different parts of the university to analyze how work and employment is being changed by new technologies, by the pandemic, by Brexit, and all these macroeconomic environmental changes, and how to ensure that we remain competitive and happy at the same time.
Excellent. Well, it sounds a really exciting research agenda, and as you say, one that is reaching its tentacles out across the university and across numerous other subdisciplines. So a really great opportunity. That's really good to hear. I think time is pretty much beating us here. So I would just like to say, Ying, thank you very much for your presentation and many congratulations on your chair.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank colleagues in the school and across the university and more widely for attending. Your engagement has really been appreciated and some smashing questions that will provide lots of food for thought for Ying and colleagues in the department as well. So overall, thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.